Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new track review video. We're going to talk about several recently released songs that I happened to hear in the past few weeks or so. I haven't done one of these videos in a while, so I thought it was about time I bring you guys some thoughts on some new songs. We're going to get right into it today with this new Opeth track, Heart and Hand. There were actually two versions of this track that were released, one in English, one in Swedish. In fact, this new Opeth album that we're going to be getting in a few months is being released in English and in Swedish. I heard both versions of this new track here, and overall my opinions on either version really aren't different from one another. I don't speak or understand Swedish, so I can't really judge the lyrics in that version of the track as harshly as the English version, though I believe, to my understanding, that the lyrics are meant to be the same for the most part. I think this is a good song overall. I think that it's a bit more daring than what Opeth have been doing on their past few releases or so. I mean, the band isn't really pulling from that death metal influence that they had on a lot of their pre-2010s work, but it's still a pretty solid track overall. One of my favorite aspects of this track overall are the vocals, which, while I said before that they don't really pull from that death metal influence that a lot of fans want the band to return to, I still think the clean vocals that are done here on this track sound really nice overall in both versions of the track too. I like a lot of the harmonies that pop up on this thing. They're just a really solid performance through and through. I also like the kind of noisy instrumental passage that pops up a good way into this track. It's a bit unique sounding, a bit different, and I like how it moves the track along and keeps things fresh and interesting. Outside of a lot of those positives I mentioned previously, I will say that this track does feel a little bit typical at times as far as criticisms go I have with this track. Not necessarily this is an awful thing or anything, it just makes certain parts of this track sound a bit more forgettable than others. I will say that this track overall is performed very nicely from the band. It all comes together into a nice package. I just think at times it's a bit typical for this point in the band's career. If you're familiar with the sounds that they've been playing around with in the past few albums of theirs, this isn't anything that's super crazy experimental when compared to any of that. It's very much in the same vein, though it is slightly different. And overall, I am pretty excited to see what the band is going to do on this upcoming album of theirs. Overall, if you're a fan of this style that Opeth have been doing on their past few releases, you will like this track, at least to some extent. If you don't like that sound, you probably won't enjoy this track all that much. But overall, I think it's a good song. Not a great one necessarily, but still a pretty solid track. Moving on, the next three tracks I want to talk about come from Charlemagne's Menagerie, and all three of these songs are from the same upcoming project, which is going to be a mashup remix project that mixes some more typical tracks with video game themed music. Overall, a pretty unique idea that I was pretty excited to see how it was going to turn out. Of course, I haven't heard the full project yet, but with these three new teaser tracks, I think that they're all pretty interesting in different respects. The first of the three tracks I'm going to be talking about is the Lavender Noise Voodoo mix. This is a remix of the Lavender Town music from the original Pokemon games, a track that I like quite a bit from that soundtrack, and I think this remix is overall pretty great. This track essentially takes the really solid foundation that the original Lavender Town music has, and Charlemagne Menageries it up. In that sense, I mean that a lot of the new elements that are brought to the table here in this mix feel very reminiscent of a lot of the styles that were present on No Signal, the debut album from this project that came out last year. It was a project I liked quite a bit, especially when it came to a lot of the sounds present on that thing, and in a lot of regards, this thing sounds like an instrumental that could have popped up on that project if it didn't have the attachment to the Pokemon video game music. Like, if this was some alternate reality where that music was never tied to that series and it was something that was just made up here as part of this song as a completely original composition, I could see this working very nicely as an instrumental on that project. So overall, I really enjoy this track. I like how it takes the original Lavender Town theme, keeps a lot of the same elements that made it great, the kind of spooky vibe that it has going for it, and just enhances it even more while adding in a lot of new textures and ideas that I think will just complement the original sound really nicely. Overall, this is probably my favorite song out of all three of these ones that have been dropped so far from this upcoming project. It's a great track, one you should definitely check out. The second track from this upcoming album that I'm going to be talking about is Balls Over Baghdad, this mashup between the Outkast track Bombs Over Baghdad and the Pokemon, I believe it's the battle theme or one of the battle themes from the original game. I apologize, my video game music knowledge is not the sharpest at the moment, but I definitely recognize this tune, and I think the mashup here works a lot better than I would have expected hearing this idea just in concept alone. I really love the start of this track where the instrumental comes in and it's very energetic and chaotic and crazy, originally made to kind of hype you up for an upcoming battle, but in this context it's made to be the beat and the backbone to Andre 3000's opening verse here on this track, which works surprisingly well, and I think that he brings a lot of energy to his performance here that matches this instrumental really nicely. It's like this instrumental, or this portion of the instrumental rather, in Andre's verse are like on the same wavelength, despite the fact that they were made for completely different context originally. They just pair up with a lot of the same energy that I think works. And while I don't think that Big Boy's verse later on pairs up quite as nicely with the instrumental that he's over, I still think it works out far better than what I would have expected hearing this idea on paper. Through and through though, this is a really solid mashup. It has a unique idea of sounds it wants to pull together, and it pulls it off rather nicely. And it makes me want to hear a full Outkast album with chiptune themed instrumentals, though honestly at this point I'd be willing to accept any kind of Outkast album, but that's a completely different point entirely. Overall, definitely check this track out if you're a fan of Pokemon, Outkast, or especially if you're a fan of both. The final of the 3 Charlemagne's Menagerie tracks I'm going to be talking about is Zelda Eastwood, this mashup between Gorillaz' Clint Eastwood, and I believe it's the overworld music from the original Zelda. I could be wrong with that because once again, my video game music knowledge is not the sharpest at the moment, but it's from Zelda. I am familiar with the track and I do enjoy it, as do I with the original Gorillaz song that's being mashed into here as well. Once again, a pretty unique blend of sounds on this thing, but once again it also ends up working far nicer than I would have expected on paper. Essentially what you have going on here in this track is a mixture of the Zelda instrumental with the vocals from the Clint Eastwood track. I especially like Del's verses here in the song, just how effortless he sounds flowing over this instrumental that sounds completely different than the one on the original Gorillaz track. And I know that that's not necessarily his fault here in the song, but I still think it's really cool how that was pulled off. I think the beat suits him really nicely in a way that I wasn't expecting. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool. The only complaint I might have with the verses here is that for some reason the censored version of his verses are used with the swear words edited out. I'm not sure if this was some kind of artistic choice or whatever, but I didn't really care for that choice over choosing to use the original. I don't know. That's just how it ended up being here on the song, I guess. When it comes to 2D's verses, or choruses rather, here in this track, I don't think that they mix quite as nicely with the instrumental. They do sound a bit awkward at times, but still, considering the verses take up more of this track, I think that overall this song is still a hit. For fans of the Gorillaz and for fans of Zelda, and especially for fans of both of those things, this is definitely a track that you want to check out, because overall, it's pretty solid. And finally, the last track I want to talk about here today in this track review segment video is this new version of Billie Eilish's Bad Guy featuring Justin Bieber. I like the original Bad Guy track quite a bit. It's probably my favorite song from that new Billie Eilish record. And overall, I just figured I'd give this remix a listen, not because I particularly like Justin Bieber or anything. I'm pretty indifferent towards his output recently, but I didn't know what to expect from this. But overall, this is a pretty underwhelming remix, one that definitely feels more forgettable than anything else. The only major difference to this track is that Justin Bieber is given the second verse here, and while it's not an awful verse or anything, like the lyrics aren't trash, his performance isn't absolute garbage or anything, it's still incredibly forgettable and lifeless sounding, and it's just lacking in a lot of the personality that Billie Eilish herself brings to this track. In comparison to her, he's just so much more lifeless and uninteresting to listen to. Not even the really solid instrumental that this track has always had going for it could really save his part of the track here, which ends up being the weakest part easily in my opinion. I just cannot wait for it to get back to Billie here on this song whenever I'm listening to his part of the track. Outside of his feature though, I mean, everything else on the track is still pretty fine. Like I said, I like the original song, so I still like pretty much everything leading up to his verse here on the track, and most of what follows after is still pretty solid as well. My opinion on it really hasn't changed. It's just that with so little changes made to this track, and the one change being something I don't really care for, I don't see any reason for me personally to return to this version of the song over the original, which I still think is a great track. So overall, I would only recommend this track to the hardcore Billie Eilish fans, maybe the hardcore Justin Bieber fans out there as well, especially if you happen to fall into both of those camps, I guess. But I guess besides from that, unless you're in those parties, I don't think this track will do much for you. But with that said, that sums up everything I have to share with you guys in today's video. It is just my own personal opinion, everything I've said here today, so if you happen to disagree on my thoughts on any of these tracks, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you also leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.